James Bond, been in the news cycle a lot lately. We obviously covered the whole transition of power from Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson over to Amazon and Jeff Bezos. They now control the Bond franchise. They have creative control, and so they're going to move forward with this next James Bond film and just the franchise in totality. But now the question has to be asked: who's going to direct the next James Bond? Who are the front runners? Who are the main contenders? Who's going to be in that director's chair when we do get Bond 26? And so, according to the Wrap, apparently Chris Nolan is Amazon's number one pick right now, which, shocker, he's one of the greatest filmmakers in the world. Who wouldn't have him as his number one pick for anything? But apparently he's the number one pick, and a handful of industry insiders reportedly told the outlet that the Oppenheimer director remains at the top of the list for the tech company in their next Bond search for a director. And it's also interesting because Nolan does have a little bit of history with Bond. He was apparently close to directing a James Bond movie after he made Tenet, which is just a few years ago, but he ultimately chose to make Oppenheimer instead because Barbara Broccoli, the former longtime head of control and producer of 007, she refused to grant him final cut on the franchise. That's just never been something that they've done, and the director just didn't want to do that. Chris Nolan, obviously, he likes to have final cut and be in full control of his visions, and so he decided to go ahead and make Oppenheimer instead. But now with Amazon taking over the property, that policy might change. They might actually grant final cut to Chris Nolan if he decides he wants to actually make a Bond movie. So I ask you, do you want to see Chris Nolan make a Bond movie? Do you think that this is likely? What are your thoughts on this being even a possibility and being in the realm of possibility for whatever that next Bond movie might look like?
I think a Nolan Bond movie would be fire. And I know again, a lot of this came after Tenet. Like, I remember they seen Tenet and was like, oh shoot, man, can you make a Bond movie for us? And then all that stuff with the final cut, I think, kind of went down. So in Tenet, does have feelings of like, man, this dude would make a good Bond movie. I think I would be excited for that, but at the same time, I don't know if Christopher Nolan is still interested in doing something, like that at this time. I don't see why he wouldn't, but at the same time, he's a busy man and he has a lot going on. So we could, and I wouldn't hate that. What's also interesting though is all the other names I've seen be in the hat. I've seen Martin Campbell be in the hat. I've seen Denis be in the hat. I've seen Luca Guadagnino be in the hat. I've seen Antoine Fuqua be in the hat. Like all of those names are interesting to me. I'm like, yeah, any of those people I think would give us an potential interesting take on Bond. I understand why Christopher Nolan's number one. I really do. I think I think he'd make a pretty fire Bond movie. But yeah, I think I'd like to see Nolan. Do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. Part of me feels like the fact that Amazon is telling us we've been thinking about Christopher Nolan. I don't know. That always makes me feel like it's not going to happen when people come out and say stuff like that. Like, oh, we're looking for Nolan. But any of those names in the hat, to be honest, I'd be interested.
I'm never gonna reject Chris Nolan directing. If he wants to take a stab at it, be my fucking guest. I'll be there on day one, ready to go. It's Chris Nolan, for goodness sake. Don't think it's gonna happen. Not at this point in his career. I could see it happening a few years ago, but the man wields such unique power that very few filmmakers ever get in Hollywood. He literally controls his destiny at this point. He has made so many hits and has been so successful time and time again that he can do whatever he wants. He's in that rare air of Scorsese, Spielberg,
Cameron,
Ridley Scott. They can do whatever the fuck they want to do and answer to nobody. And having Final Cut is a part of that.
Yeah.
I don't see why he would relinquish any of that control, even if Amazon gives him Final Cut. Well, that could be great, but also, like, the question remains, what does this theatrical distribution look like, Amazon? That's not a game that you guys know how to play. Y'all haven't delved into that field quite yet. They are committing to more. Apparently in 2026 and 2027, they're committing to doing, I believe, somewhere between 12 and 15 theatrical film releases. That's going to be a huge pivot from their current strategy. So it does appear that they want to get into the theatrical business, but they're going to be young. They're going to be brand new to the game for the most part, outside of the few things that they've done so far. Chris Nolan is all about that experience. He's all about making sure that this is going to have a 120-day window. There will be no streaming for the
Mm-hmm.
first 3, 4, 5 months,
Mm-hmm.
how successful it is. It's going to have an IMAX exclusive run. It's going to have all
Mm-hmm.
these different conditions and things that if they can't agree to any of it, he's like, I'm out. I'm doing something
Yeah.
else. I don't have to do this. And so I just I don't know if he's going to relinquish any of that control and relinquish any of that opportunity to just control his fate for the next few years and
Yeah.
what he wants to do. And if he does one, they're going to want him to do more than just one. You know, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
want at least a trilogy out of him, which is
For sure.
that's not like a decade long commitment that we're talking about. And I'm just not
Mm-hmm.
sure if he's interested in that at this point. You mentioned some other names and front runners. If not him, then who else could be somebody that would like really perk up your ears? You would say like I would totally be on board with that. Would it be some of the names you mentioned? Would it be I'm thinking of other British directors: Steve McQueen, Matthew
Mm.
Vaughn, Danny Boyle, who's also been in conversations previously about doing a Bond movie. Like, who would really get you excited to be the next director of a Bond film?
Man. I kind of like the idea of Antoine Fuqua. I kind of like that. He's of course meddled around the franchise with the Equalizer films. And of course worked on other movies, Olympus Has Fallen, and all these other. But I think he has. I think I don't know. I like the idea of what he could bring. I think to the table of Bond. I think it would be different and something we haven't quite seen before and on a different level. I think Antoine would be really cool for it.
He's not British though. That is
That
that,
is, and that's like the thing. That's the question though. Is like,
but
dang,
that might not matter anymore because Amazon's in
it might not
control.
matter. It's Amazon. Yeah,
They might
so
not even give a fuck. But yeah, it
I'm
might
not
be out the
sure.
window. I
Yeah.
just I don't know. That's another question that I have about this franchise. How inherently British does it remain in this whole transition? Like
Mm,
how much of that culture and aesthetic do we keep towards Bond as a property now that it's no longer being oversaw by a family who comes from that lineage? You know,
that's good. That's a good
that's
question.
that's a big question that I don't know a lot of people are talking about, but I mean, Kerry Fukunaga, he's not British as well. He did direct the most recent ones, and so it's not like it's a hard and fast rule per se. They've been a
Hmm.
little bit flexible on it, but I guess it just depends on what the importance of that culture and that aesthetic is to Bond moving forward. Which I would hope that they would retain that. It's a
Yeah,
British creation. Like I don't want that to be different
that's true.
personally, and
Steve
so
McQueen would be tight.
Steve
Yeah,
McQueen would be really good, and I would throw out Danny Boyle too because he was considered
yeah,
a
Danny
while
Boyle.
ago. I
Hmm.
think he was considered for Casino Royale, but it didn't work out for whatever reason. I would love him. He's about to do this 28 days later, or years later,
Oof, can't
continuation.
wait.
So he's got a hot hand right now. I suspect that movie's going to be really good. Very veteran, experienced filmmaker.
Hmm.
But yeah, him and Steve McQueen would be the ones where I'm like, oh yeah, I would be totally on board with those two.
How would you feel about like Guy Ritchie?
No,
Dude,
Guy Ritchie's too. No, he's too. He's so
yeah,
British. He's
so
so
too
fucking
British.
British. Like, I think that might also present possibly. But I don't know. He is one of the more experienced filmmakers that has an incredible
Hmm.
resume for the most part. I just don't. He's done so much Bond adjacent stuff already. I don't know what he's going to bring to
Yeah.
Bond. That's really what I'm concerned about. Like, damn near everything else he's done outside of the franchise. Not that he's ever worked within Bond, but he's already done so many adjacent things that are kind of like that.
Hmm.
Especially with these recent efforts with the Gentleman series on Netflix and the movie and all of that. That feels like Bond. So I don't
Yeah.
know how much he would bring in terms of a unique take. I could be wrong, but he doesn't get me as excited as some of those other names. So
My last
I don't know.
one. My last one. How you feel about Edgar Wright?
That's interesting.
Because it's
I
not
don't
something
hate
he's
it.
done before. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not something he's done before. Edgar Wright could be like a little silly and playful,
for
but also
sure.
he's really good at filmmaking.
Oh, for
So
sure. I don't
yeah.
hate that actually. I mean, we've seen times where directors who have historically been known to, direct horror or comedy, they transition to another, I guess, more
Hmm.
serious genre, and they kind of excel
They kill
because
it. Yeah.
there's really nothing harder to crack than comedy and
And
or
comedy.
horror. Those are
Hmm.
really difficult things to actually execute, and so he's a great filmmaker, very experienced, has the chops for sure. I'm interested. I don't hate that. I don't hate that
Okay.
actually. And he can bring a completely different, unique take. And he's gonna lock the fuck in. He's gonna take complete care
Yeah,
of
he
it
gonna
and
lock
be
in.
very,
Yeah.
very focused on on making his own style of Bond. So I kind of like that as a consideration. That's a good name. So it's almost an endless list of really really good people that could be considered. So we'll obviously be waiting to see what ultimately happens with this next James Bond movie. It should be super interesting.